What's going on, mobile gamers? Today we're going to be modifying the Odin 2 with some black on white and white on black. So let's jump in and learn how I modded this thing. Power the device down and remove the joystick hats. Remove your shell if you have one as well, so we can access the back screws, which are four T4 bit screws. Find something to prop the device up on so that the joystick aren't being pressed into the mat like a box that is sturdy and solid. Remove the 4 screws at the back. Make sure to remember what number you place them on your mat. Here I place these ones on the big space on the right of the board. Remember to remove your micro SD card before the next step so we can peel off the backplate. Removal of the backplate. I placed my plastic spudger tool near the R2 crack and gave it a bit of pressure to release this from the shell. I used the guitar pick spacers so I could use my spudger for the rest of the separation process, sliding it along the top edge. You'll start to hear small cracking sounds, which is just the connection being separated. Don't worry. Once I got the top ready, I left the guitar pick inside the top of the shell so the shell wouldn't try to reseat again and stay separated. This is where I started working my way around the shell, starting from the gap near the L2 trigger. You'll hear that crack again when you get into that actual shell. Don't force it, just be nice and it'll start separating. Now that I could see the splitting, I could continue working my way around with my blue spudger to remove the rest of the backplate. The M1 and M2 buttons might just fall out. You'll hear this, but don't be scared. They're just seated in there and they just begin to fall. Now the backplate will be ready to be removed at this point. It's not being held down by anything other than those plastic tabs around the edges. There's 2 Phillips screws here in the plastic plate. Once that plate's removed, we'll work on the fan. The fan has 2 screws, one on the bottom right, which is visible, and the other on the top left, which is underneath a foam pad. This foam pad is also adhered down to the cooling panel that vents the device, so peel the top off a little bit to remove the fan, but don't yank on it or peel it all the way off. Removing the fan cable, pinch the wire close to the connector and wiggle it back and forth by pulling up until it pops out. Don't pull on it or yank on it too hard. We don't want to rip the wires. Now the metal cooling plate has 2 screws, one hidden underneath a sticker and the other one on the top left. Once you remove those, grab your spudger and put it underneath the top part to pop the metal plate up. It is stuck underneath the plastic tabs at the top as well, so I put my spudger at the top and slowly popped it out. Now the main board is exposed by this point. You can see the thermal pad is still intact, which is nice, but if you want to throw some thermal paste on here instead, by all means go ahead and do so. For the battery, there's a small tab at the bottom right to pop it out and take it off the board, which is highly recommended because we're going to remove it anyways. Right here I decided to add some heat to the top ribbon cable for the power button. You need to be super careful with this if you want to back up of that ribbon cable. Otherwise, like I did, you'll rip it. Tip, give it a bunch of heat and with your spudger try to get behind the little module board that is adhered to the top metal plate. This is also when I found out we needed to remove the battery, so that's coming next. After adding some heat, the adhesive holds down the battery, has 2 tabs to remove it if you don't want to use that sticky adhesive again. Otherwise, I used some heat with my spudger and popped it off from the top and slowly removed it myself. Removal of the power button and the volume rockers. There's 2 screws adhered to a metal plate that holds this down. The entire piece is underneath. Gently pull the ribbon cable for the volume rockers, popping up the tab at the top. I also added more heat here to remove the glue on the ribbon cable, which helped peel it away slowly. Now for the metal plate. This plate was annoying, but I got it underneath it and it just popped off. There's a rubber membrane and the ribbon cable for the volume buttons here, so remove them so we can replace them with the new ones. I didn't end up sticking down the new power button ribbon cable, only the part where the board was for the button itself. I stuck it back to the metal plate. It's up to you, but what I ended up doing was using some thermal tape to adhere it down. So at this point, I was able to put those ribbon cables back in. That plate goes on first, so adhere them or place them in so that you can make sure you put them back on. Left button remove. Actually, the right side of the front. I noticed there were 3 Phillips screws on the trigger module, 3 on the board, and 3 on the LED plastic. So I started with the triggers, keeping those screws in the big tray at the right side on the mat. There's a ribbon cable for the triggers as well, which needs to be removed from the board. It's actually easy to pop off with the flip tab. Now for the 2 screws holding down the speaker at the bottom, which needed to be removed to get to the main board. I then removed the 3 screws from the board, then I moved on to the LED light plastic. Next, we moved on to the 3 screws. The vibrator motor, same process as the fan. Wiggle the connector back and forth nicely as it's glued in to the LED plastic, then pull until it pops out. The joystick screws were up next. There's 2 of them. After I removed the ribbon cable gently, it connected to a pop tab connector. I just pulled out the joystick. Removal of the board itself. We need to remove the pop tab for the ribbon cable going underneath to the motherboard. It's not hard to do, just put your spudger underneath the black tab and pop it up, then pull the board to the left until it gently releases. This is where we can remove and replace the buttons we removed with the new ones. Make sure not to forget the rubber dome pad. I did, so I had to tear this back apart again, but don't forget it before putting the board back in. Once ready, this is where we can put it all back together in reverse. So what I did was connected the joystick to the board first, put the ribbon cable in and screwed it down. I then screwed the board down with the screw and placed the ribbon cable in that connects to the main board. I made sure to put the ribbon cable in at the top before placing the trigger button module in place. Worked my way to the LED plastic and vibrator motor. Place the bumper in as it just slit in there nicely. The trigger buttons, however, click into the main module. Just make sure you have the right module for the right side. They are marked L and R. When screwing it back into place, have some fun with this because it's magnetized. This was a pain in the butt to do so because the screws just kept on trying to connect to the magnet. But that's about it for the left side. Now, the right side of the console. On the right side, I started with the 2 screws for the speaker. Everything on this side was almost similar except for the power button and the volume plus and minus buttons. I luckily was able to just place the speaker off to the left the entire time, but if you want to remove it, you can gently remove it from the connection. Next, I removed the LED plastic. I was also able to place this off to the side for the installation, off to the left. Now I removed the 3 screws for the triggers, or whatever you want to call them, the L2 buttons, and placed them off to the side as well. I was in for a shock when I noticed a heat plate on the joysticks. Make note of how it went in because you'll need to place this on the joystick later. It does have an adhesive, so you'll have to try to peel it off. Now I removed the 2 screws for the joystick and popped out the ribbon cable the same way I removed the left one. Once that was removed, I removed the ribbon cable for the trigger as well. Now for the board screws. There's 3 here as well, so remove them, then place the board on its side flipped over like shown. You can now access the D-pad at this point and the 2 buttons if you're replacing them with other buttons. Once you're done putting the buttons in, flip the board back over and grab your joystick to put the metal plate on the back. Like I said before, this metal plate was kind of annoying, but it did come off with some force. Heat would probably help here. Now place your joystick back in the hole. Make sure not to crimp the ribbon cable. Screw one of the screws back into the joystick, adhering it down to the board. Right here, I put the ribbon cable back in for the L1 button into place. Tip: there are white lines to try to line up these little ribbon cables straight when you place them back in. This is where the fun begins. I screwed everything else down and worked on putting the rest back together. Once I was done with the right side, I grabbed the battery, tried to line it up as best as I could so that the little connector that connects to the board was exactly lined up. This part takes some practice. Don't force it. You need to feel for the connector on the board here, or you could damage your device. It'll pop back in nicely. You'll be able to feel it with your finger if you wiggle it back and forth. Just take your time with it until it feels like it's snapped in. The metal heat plate was interesting in sort of just snapped back in by placing it flat at the location where it goes and pushing down with the spudger sort of slid it into the top. The two clips just kind of clicked it back into place. After trying to remember which screws were which, again, note these two longer screws, or there's 4 longer screws, are for the metal plate and the plastic plate. I screwed the metal plate down and moved on to the L2 buttons. This part was fun again, as the magnet on the L2 kept getting in the way, but just take your time and you'll get it. For the fan, I made sure to put it on before the plastic cover, starting with the screw under the foam adhesive and then putting the second screw in at the bottom right. Then for the plastic plate, the longer 2 screws easily went into place after I put the fan in. I did a test off screen to make sure it turned on, which it did, and that was great news. The backplate pieces just dropped in easily, and I was able to sandwich the backplate onto the console. Hearing those clicks was just so nice. Don't forget the 4 screws on the backplate. If you have screws left over, you messed up somewhere and you need to figure that out. Now for the big reveal. I love the way this turned out. Someone said it looked like a special edition Oreo Odin 2. That's about it for how I modded my Oreo Odin 2. You guys have a nice day. See you next time.